You are listening to Talking Africa, the podcast that gets behind the news from the continent, brought to you by the Africa Report. My name's Nicholas Norbrook. To get the very latest news, analysis and comments, do visit our website, theafricareport.com, where you can sign up to our daily brief for free. Now, the news this weekend will be dominated by the coming into force of the African Continental Free Trade Zone. High-powered delegations will be jetting into Niamey in Niger for a 55-nation AU summit to flag it all off. Even Nigeria has signed up, which is big news. But as everyone says, this is just the beginning of the work. Mukhisa Kituyi is the Secretary General of UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development. They are particularly concerned about rules of origin. What is that, you cry? For I am not a trade lawyer. Well, let Mr. Kituyi explain.
Trying to put it as simply as possible. The rules of origin determine the economic origin of a product and kind of provide the basis for assessing whether the product is eligible for preferential treatment in a regional market or not. By establishing the economic nationality of any goods produced in a free trade area, like in the CFTA, it becomes something like the passport for those goods, telling customs authorities everywhere in the area that these are goods that can be considered made in Africa or not. And on the basis of that, their entitlement to preferential treatment in the market.
Right. So you might have a T-shirt, say, which has been made in Ethiopia and exported into let's say Nairobi, just for the sake of it, and the cotton may have been sourced within Ethiopia. What if the textiles have been imported in from Shenzhen, from China, into Ethiopia, and then now Ethiopia is exporting this, having assembled it in Ethiopia and exporting it to Kenya? What would the rules of origins discussions around that be?
If a Chinese investor has invested in an industrial zone, for example, in Ethiopia, what you usually do is we provide for a mechanism of valuing the added value of the product from Ethiopia. For example, like in the East African community, the starting point was that 35% of the value of the product must be demonstrated to be locally sourced. So if a product has a yarn or even a fabric coming in from China, you have to prove that the value added inside Ethiopia is at least 35% of the value of the product before it can qualify for the local market. If, on the other hand, the local value added is just importing canvas, cutting it, stitching it, and then labeling it, it may not satisfy the requirements of the Ethiopian passport for purposes of preferential treatment.
Right. What are the discussions like in various African fora about the rules of origin?
Okay, first of all, that the many negotiators have to be helped to build technical capacity on how to develop a comprehensive, simple, transparent, predictable, but effective rules of origin regime. And that has been some area of negotiation. In fact, they have not totally completed. It has been done for most of the first half of this year at the Africa Union in Addis. And it's partly listening to different arguments that were coming out of this that we thought will help by publishing a comprehensive study on the role of rules of origin regime that is simple, understandable, predictable, but effective, that will help the process of how member states build a comfort level that the free trade area cannot be used for dumping by third parties from outside Africa into their own territory.
So is that the real concern, that it can be a route for dumping?
Yes, of course, it's a real concern that when you create a common market, some of the time you are assigning your neighbors the responsibility for prefecting borders, that other countries cannot abuse your territory by using routing products through other countries in the free trade area into your customs territory. And so building a collective wall around the community, as it were, but most importantly, certifying that what is made in Africa is actually made in Africa becomes one of the more practical challenges for many customs authorities.
Can you point to a nation where the customs authorities are really getting it right? What are they doing?
And if you look at the East African community, for example, which is a fairly advanced creation of a common market, one of the first things they did is to harmonize the national rules of origin capacity for the customs authorities, standardize the documents for verification of rules of origin. And then at the main points of entry, particularly from the sea, that's Mombasa and Dar es Salaam, you have offices manned by customs officers from all the community countries, so that for transshipment of goods addressed to a member state which is not the entry point, there is already verification at that point that these products satisfy the rules of origin requirements. And that also means that those goods that do not have the ESC passport are levied a duty at the point of entry to reduce the chances of diversion and dumping in the transit country.
What are the products or the goods which are most likely to be dumped in Africa? Are there sort of particular culprits? Everyone's heard of the chicken wars between Brazil and South Africa, but I'm sure there are many, many more.
I mean, of course, there's a wide array of products that can be dumped. You have had cases of Brazilian sugar finding its way into the East African Community territory, falsely labeled as a produce of Malawi because of COMESA market access. We have had all manner of high seas relabeling of transshipped products from other countries. But constantly the challenge and responsibility is improving surveillance and early warning for attempts to subvert the customs procedures of the common market.
So just to use that example of Brazilian sugar, is the concern then that with the rules of origin, if that does manage to evade detection at, say, the port in Mombasa, then it could easily be sold in Uganda, and there would be no duty paid on it because it's already come into Africa, as it were.
Yeah. I mean, it just technically that once you smuggle it into the customs territory and pretend that it is sourced within a member country of the common market or the free trade area, then you can actually evade rightful levies of tariffs from the final destination country. Of course, there will be cases like Uganda when the whistle is blown because Uganda is a net surplus country in sugar, unlike Kenya. So the problem will be much more about its destination in Kenya more than Uganda. Yeah, but this is just an example. But there will always be very many cases of either manufactured, semi-manufactured, or agricultural produce trying to acquire a false passport in order to access an uncustomed market.
The American Growth and Opportunity Act and the European Everything But Arms trade, both of them, allow a certain amount of tariff-free access into the EU and US. Are they going to be affected by the AFCFTA, the free trade area?
Of course, in a way they can be. First of all, of course, the AGOA and EBA have different rules of origin. Like if you look at the apparel sector, whereas Everything But Arms requires that the yarn that is woven into fabric for textiles made in African countries must be made from within African countries, must be exported from within African countries. AGOA has a waiver on the lesser developed countries, so-called, that allows for them to use fabric that is sourced outside the territory that is having AGOA market access. The net effect is that it is easier to export things under AGOA because of the low benchmark of local content, and more difficult to export under the EBA. But if you look at the policy of industrialization as one of the benefits of market access, the EBA incentive forces countries to deepen the value chain locally or in the region, and therefore it is better for industrialization and value addition than the AGOA waiver, which allows for importation of canvas, cut, stitch, and package and send to America. So these are some of the challenges, the differences. But made in Africa, building regional value chains will increase not only compliance with everything but arms requirements, but will actually increase the industrial content in Africa that comes through market access, whether it's the EBA or AGOA. So this is why we're pushing that instead of importing yarn or fabric from East Asia, the conditions of our CFTA in Africa can make many producers have to import from within Africa. And that not only creates access for them inside Africa, but adds value in Africa to the products that go under EBA and AGOA.
So you're pretty optimistic that the CFTA, if indeed it is properly applied, because that's another hurdle, of course, but if it is properly applied, the free trade area will actually incentivize the creation of these regional value chains. So you would have an Ethiopian yarn spinner and creator of thread in Ethiopia, and then that will either be transformed again in Ethiopia or exported semi-finished to Kenya for finishing, and then only then exported out of the continent?
Right. We are looking at that possibility, building the capacity for such value integration, but also building efficiencies that can also be leveraged for international trade outside Africa. Of course, there are challenges. There will be challenges of non-tariff barriers. There are challenges initially of transport and logistics for intermediate goods to move between countries. These are challenges that will have to be overcome. But properly applied, our projection is that intra-African trade can grow by up to 30%, and the impact on African GDP could be up to 3% as a benefit of just milking the potential that exists within the continental free trade area.
Again, maybe we're projecting ourselves forwards with too much optimism, but let's take the assumption that this works really well, and there would then be this common African position. Would there then be, in the same way that the EU has, a whole department negotiating trade deals, would there be an African Union, I imagine, linked African Trade Department, which also helped hammer out trade deals with other blocs or with other countries?
We have not come that far yet. This is still very much in the initial phase of more streamlining the movement of goods and certain services within the continent. If it grows into a customs union and a common market, then there will be the need to strengthen continent-wide institutions that not only discipline compliance within the continent, but become major players in the negotiation between Africa and the other areas, the way the Commission does for the European Union. But the Commission is a product of a very, very advanced and already significantly strengthened centralized mechanisms. Right. Africa is not at the center of surrendering some of the sovereignty in order to have a more efficient centralized authority. Right.
Yeah. You have a fair few African countries, even if they've signed up to the agreement, the Continental Free Trade Agreement, that they still lean towards using state levers